All right, we're going to head over to the Zoom line here on Labor Day because the hardest working man in the business doesn't stop working. Just got done traveling 1,200 miles for a kind of a work family. Warren, that's really what it becomes later in life. It's a hybrid. Everything's
Yeah.
a hybrid. You rarely take a vacation for a vacation. It's like, oh, you know what, honey? There's this going on, and Orlando, why don't we make a week out of it or an extra 2 days out of it and that sort of thing. So anyway, how you doing today on Labor Day?
Doing great, and you're exactly right. That's the hybrid world we live in, and so quality time used to be measured in weeks and months, and now it's measured in moments. And so, as long as you're carving out those quality moments, it all works together fine.
And if I'm going to just take a step back, and because one of the things that we like on the Crude Life is, we're organic, just like oil and gas. We're organic. And that's the thing. One of the things about the hybrid workforce, like yourself and me and a few others have, been around since the Bush senior administration, that we were kind of the originals of the hybrid workplace, to be honest. At least I was. I've been working on a laptop literally since 2000. I had a Gateway computer. Remember Gateway computers out of South Dakota with the cow
Yep.
emblem? There was just a bunch, the cow blot emblem and that sort of thing. Oh, I still remember when the hard drive crashed, and I looked at my business partner and I said, "That's literally like our office just burned down." Like, because we're in the thought business, we're in the media business, so it's not like we're out making widgets. Our widgets is Warren Martin. It's the stories that we produce from their widget Warren Martin folks. That's a great nickname to have. But anyway, so the one thing that bothered me about COVID is that they didn't reach out to more people like you and me in the world to find out how to balance that hybrid workplace. Instead, it just like, hey, let's drink martinis on Zoom. Like, come on, no, we don't do that. In fact, we actually hide the drinks when we take pictures in public and that sort of thing. Anyway, now I'm getting too far in the weeds, but I just wanted to point that out that, there's been some of us doing the hybrid work for a long time. You just got done how many miles over how many days?
Almost 1,200, almost 1,200 miles over a 2-day, 48-hour period. So,
Yeah, that's road warrior stuff. I can't do that anymore. Well, let's go through the rundown here a little bit because one of the things you did last week was the KIOGA, Kansas Independent Oil and Gas Association. We're in the annual meeting times, folks. So we're going to be going through a lot of these annual meetings, starting in Kansas, right smack dab in the center of the USA, technically. And I think it's South Dakota, actually, geographically. I know that they argue sometimes in South Dakota, outside of Belfouche and another town. But Kansas, what's going on in the Kansas Independent Gas Association? Now, Kansas is primarily independent producers, correct?
that is correct. We really don't have any major producers that are here in the state. One kind of sub major producer that's in the state. The rest of it's pretty much independent oil and gas producers. We have over 2,000 independent oil and gas producers here in the state. And KIOGA is the largest of three different member organizations in the state. And so it's one of our more important meetings that we have. It's a really great time to get everybody together and kind of figure out, where's everybody at? What is kind of putting together the game plan for moving forward through the winter and the work that we need to get done in the winter. And so it's kind of in many ways, it's the kickoff to the school year and it's the kickoff to the year in oil and gas.
One of the issues that the media business, that's where I come from primarily, and the media business had our paradigm shift when the internet came. And it was right around the too big to fail when those bailouts started coming. And they primarily went to the tech world. And so the paradigm shift that the newspaper industry and the radio industry saw through the news cycle was giving away the information for free. And so when Facebook popped up and Yahoo and Twitter and a lot of these social media network sites, MySpace was Yahoo, that was pretty much paid for and funded by the government. So they would do economic development dollars, this and that. And the end result was that you had a lot more corporations producing a lot less news. And I fear that's going to happen to the oil and gas industry, where the independent producer might just end up getting muscled out by regulations and economic stimulus to the big people who can only afford, X amount of dollars to get the grant back and that sort of thing. Because that's the way that a lot of the farming went the same way. And it worries me. And the independents really do not have very good representation. No offense to the Kansas Independent Oil and Gas Association, but that's it. I mean, a lot of times the other associations, they kind of represent the bigger dogs, and that's it. So what is the Independent Oil and Gas Association's like biggest challenges right now? Because they've got a slew of them, Warren. And yourself, I mean, you can only do so much. KIOGA, they can only do so much. I mean, they're a lot of the elected officials, they don't even really represent the small person anymore. They're too busy, representing the future big person, if you will. So what are some of the issues facing in the independent producers?
Well, I think you're right on track right there. In fact, that's exactly what's happening. In many ways, it's intentional. What it's happening, you got Saudi Arabia that's really throwing oil on the market. You got other countries that are trying to push oil into the market to suppress the price. You got the Trump administration trying to keep the price of crude oil down because they really need the price of gasoline to remain low so that they have the public sentiment to be able to push through the policies that they want to push through. And so all of that, we've gone through a prolonged period of extremely low price of oil here in Kansas. Around the world, really, you're looking at $63 right about there. WTI, the last I looked before I drove for 2 days, but you were looking at $63 per barrel. Well, here in Kansas, that translates to about $54 to $55 per barrel for Kansas oil, and that's really below what a independent producer can produce oil within the margins that they're working because the expenses have got high. So really one of the big topics that was talked about at KIOGA was, how do we hold on? How do we work together? How do we streamline our operations so that we can make it through this low patch? Because everybody knows oil is cyclical and eventually it's going to go back up. And how do we hold on until it goes back up? And there's several different things that we need to look at. Certainly supplies. Your supply line, and when it went up in COVID, the cost went up in COVID. It never has come back down. Cost of labor went up in COVID and has never come back down in any way, shape, or form. And then you got the methane regulations, and the methane regulations, the EPA came out and under the methane regulations gave every single category that's included in that regulation in the Quad O, gave every single category 540 days to comply with the reporting procedures. But the oil and gas industry only got 90 days. And it only got 90 days because the administration is really only talking to the major companies. And the major companies have armies that are able to meet those filing criteria. The independent producer here in Kansas, the average company has about 3 employees. 3 employees for an independent producer here in Kansas. They do not have the departments that are able to meet that compliance on a 90 days. So one of the major issues was really talking with the legislators, talking with lobbyists and others to really push to get oil and gas included with all of the other categories in the Quad O to give us the 540 days for reporting rather than the 90 days, because that would add an incredible amount of expense to the oil and gas operations here in Kansas at a time where our oil is very low and the return on investment is very low. Our drill count is down. Our rig count is down here in Kansas. Drilling is down here in Kansas. We're back to right at COVID level drilling and rig counts here because the price, we just can't afford it. We do not have the margins to go out and continue exploration. And when that happens, production begins to drop off. And when production begins to drop off, the industry as a whole drops, tax revenues drop, the entire state really hurts. And so those were some of the issues that were talked about at KIOGA and really talking about, as independent companies, how do you maneuver that? How do you navigate it? And how do you position yourself for when the upswing comes, you can take advantage of that upswing?
One of the other comparisons that I've seen is through the agriculture industry. And I mentioned the media industry before with their paradigm shift. And they kind of got, I don't know, a little bit different when you have to start giving your information away for free when you could charge for it before. And the weird part about the media too is, most of the news comes from 10% of the content. And when I think of that, I think of like the stripper wells where they make up 10 to 15% of the oil and gas production. And in the world of agriculture, a lot of the family farms got outregulated, where their bookkeeping got too intense. They couldn't keep track of it at the kitchen table anymore. They needed an office. I mean, they actually needed an office because they had files and other things that really just were over their head. And so the family farm got basically outregulated. And when I think of the stripper wells and the small oil and gas families, I see what's happening. Whether they're going to have to buy drones or buy a new accounting services, but there's a shift happening with the small businesses that they just can't absorb like corporations. And when the government gives money to the corporations so they can absorb those costs as they change, it's totally an uneven ball court on many levels. On many levels, it's completely. So, what's going on with the stripper wells and some of their ability to try to keep up with the new regulations that are really being thrust in? I mean, fast too, like fast.
Yeah, I think that has a lot to do with what I was just talking about as far as, the 90-day versus the 540 days that, to give producers time to be able to maneuver the changes that are coming with the methane regulations. I think the second part of that is what we need to be doing as a nation going forward, because you're exactly right. Stripper wells account for 15% of the production in the United States on a historic basis, recent historic basis. We've contributed about 15%. And that's really important. Those stripper wells are wells that produce 15 barrels of oil a day or less. They're small wells. And one of the major problems we have is the federal government, especially under previous administrations, wanted to treat every well the same, whether it produced 1 barrel a day or whether it produced 20,000 barrels a day. They wanted to put the same regulations on each one of those wells. Well, there's no way that small independent producers that are producing stripper wells can meet the same regulatory guidelines that a well producing 20,000 barrels a day can meet. And so that needs to be taken into consideration. And it's really fundamental because most people in the United States would understand that the Strategic Petroleum Reserve is a crucial part of national security. It's crucial for our energy independence. It's crucial for protecting our nation from other countries that might want to do us ill, but is extremely critical. And most people would fight for the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. Well, consider this. The Strategic Petroleum Reserve only holds at its max 714 million barrels of oil. That's significant, and that's a very crucial part of our national security. But it only holds 714 million barrels of oil at its max. Right now, we're up in the 400 million barrel range of the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. And we would fight tooth and nail for that and to keep that Strategic Petroleum Reserve. Now, compare that to stripper wells. Stripper wells account for 15% of the oil production in the United States. Well, out of the oil production, 13 million plus barrels produced today, you can add that all up, you take 15% of it, that comes to 722 million barrels of oil per year. 722 million barrels of oil per year. In other words, stripper wells, that 15%, it accounts for more than we hold in the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. And the Strategic Petroleum Reserve is a one-time hold. It's a one-time asset. The stripper wells produce that on an annual basis. So really, we should be looking at this from the position of stripper wells need to be seen as a separate category from other wells in the oil and gas industry. They need to be regulated different. They need to be looked at different because they're more vital to our national security than the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. That's a one-time deal. This is an annual basis of oil production greater than what we hold in the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. It needs to be protected, and we need to start looking at wells differently. Those that produce 20,000 barrels have far more issue per day than a well that produces 1 barrel, and they need to be treated as such.
Warren Martin, our guest, Kansas Strong, was at the Kansas Independent Oil and Gas Association annual meeting, getting kind of a recap of some of the topics that were happening there. Segue transitioning into the future. Kansas State Fair coming up. We've got football games. Also, the Eastern Kansas Oil and Gas Association is coming up in mid-September. Let's start with the State Fair. That's coming up on the corner. What's the top conversations that you have with people, and how in depth do the conversations get at the State Fair? I can't imagine that they get too deep in the water.
Sometimes they do. We actually, tomorrow we'll be loading up and headed down to Hutchinson to set up for the State Fair. We'll spend starts on Friday. We'll spend 10 days there interacting with the public. We have a good army of volunteers that will come down and set up in our booth, and we're just there to we take our interactive kiosk units for kids to come in and play and learn about the oil and gas industry, and then we sit there at the table and field questions. The questions predominantly are driven by what's happening in the media. Whatever's being talked about in the media, that's what the questions that come to our table are. So, back when in 2016, 17, 18, when we had a lot of earthquake activity here in Kansas, that's what all the questions revolved around. When the Biden administration was there and the methane emissions, methane was and greenhouse gases were what we talked about. So every year we kind of have to pay attention to what's going on in the media to really figure out what those questions are going to come. Most of the time, they're very surface level, but this is a place where people can come and get in-depth answers. We have experts that are behind our booth. We have geologists. We have petroleum engineers. We have producers. We have all range of people that sit behind that table that are able to address those questions. And then my office is there the entire 10 days. We're always on call and to come and answer any questions that whoever's manning the booth at the time might not have an answer to. And so it's a great time to interact with the public, and we really enjoy that 10 days.
I bet you get a lot of people that come up and say you're doing good things too, that keep it up. And I'm just saying that a lot of people are probably giving you a pat on the back as opposed to any sort of questionary resistance, because a lot of people think that, when oil and gas people are out in the public, they're always just fielding negative questions and et cetera, et cetera. And I've found that probably 3 out of 10 are negative, and the rest are pretty encouraging people. What have you found in public?
I would put the number much higher. I would say that about 9 out of every 10 is extremely encouraging.
Yeah, I would say that too. Actually, it's just the negative ones seem to stand out a little bit more, maybe.
And that's when we started doing this a number of years ago and started putting together our volunteer list. My office, we would man that thing 80% of the time because we just couldn't get volunteers. And then we started getting a few volunteers to sign up, and they would come and they would sit. They really enjoyed it, because for a lot of people, it is an opportunity for them to say thank you. Thank you for what you do. Appreciate what you do. It's a pat on the back because, a lot of going to the state fair, you have a lot of rural people that go to the state fair, people that have farms and ranches that raise livestock. They understand the importance of oil and gas and what they're doing for their livelihood. And so there is a lot more people at the state fair. In fact, in Kansas as a whole, our surveys show that only 11% of the state say that they cannot stand us. Only 11%. And that gets blown out of proportion in the media. I would say probably nationwide it's a little higher than 11%, but I guarantee you it's not nearly as bad as what the media reports it to be. They just go, you have to remember, the media always goes to the extreme because that's where the story is. And if you have an extreme view, they'll put you on the air. And when you get into the general public, you find more of the moderate people. We have about 40% of the population of Kansas that says they honestly cannot say whether the oil and gas industry is good or bad. That's what we call the messy middle. That's what we're there to interact with and to help them have a little bit of more understanding of what we do, how we do it, why it's important to you. Those are the people that we're trying to talk to.
We're going to talk about some university stuff in a minute, but lately I've been thinking about asking for a refund from my alma mater, North Dakota State University, because, I was trained in communications and journalism and English and that sort of thing. And none of that stuff is applicable in today's market. Like, you got to have 3 exclamation points. And I'm thinking, 3? What's going on? 3 exclamation points. And I was always taught not to yell fire in a crowded theater. And everybody funds the person that yells fire in the crowded theater. I mean, so to your point, you're exactly correct. The media has a lot to do with it. But here's the one thing that I'd like to challenge everybody out there to really do some critical thing. One of the things that was kind of fun about growing up as Generation X, we did a thing called critical thinking. And I know the millennials and the Gen Z and other people don't necessarily understand or like critical thinking, but it's something that does work. It's when you take a look at both sides and you kind of look back and forth, and then you take that information and move forward with the best possible thought. And we kind of grew up on that. And one of the things that I loved when I would go out in public, like one of these state fairs, because I've been doing this for 30 years out in public, is that you're right. It's actually 9 out of 10 that people are generally positive or indifferent, at least. They're not coming up ready to fight. But the ones who come up and fight, they are so ready to go that they can take over. But my point is this, is that a lot of times when you're talking with somebody who's a pleasant, civil individual, that's when the fine tuning happens, Warren. That's when, okay, I'll tell you the first world problem I would like to have solved. And then they start thinking about that. It'd be nice if maybe we could get, ramps in every building in town or something like, whatever it is. I know, a terrible example, I know. But my point is that a lot of these fine tuning kind of conversations, somebody would turn that into the main thing. And because of the shock and awe 3 exclamation point culture that we have to try to draw your attention, I think that's the layered issue more than anything, Warren, is that so many people are looking for attention, media included, that they will hype and exaggerate the littlest thing, make a mountain out of a molehill. And for the oil and gas industry, it's had a 2-prong effect. One is it's actually stifled conversation. People are afraid to talk. They're afraid to actually give advice to solutions because they're afraid they might end up, oh, this person said this. And anyway, I'm sorry. I just kind of got going there, Warren, but you follow me at all there?
Yeah, I follow you. I think we get into specifics and we miss the point. And I think that happens on both sides. I think that happens to the general public where you get wrapped up in the new park in your community, or you get wrapped up on not using plastic bags at the grocery store, or not using plastic straws and using paper straws instead. And you get wrapped up in these very specific things. I think in the industry, we have just as much of that temptation where we get wrapped up in the specifics. I will do a presentation and talk about the process of drilling for oil, and then I'll have an engineer, petroleum engineer, that will come up to me afterwards and say, well, that's not exactly how it works. And I'll look at him and I'll say, I know that's not exactly how it works, but if I explained exactly how it works, I would have to give them a petroleum engineering degree. And we're trying to take what you do as a petroleum engineer and communicate that in layman's terms to where you don't have to be a petroleum engineer to understand what we do. And so that's what we really have keyed in on and worked with our volunteers on, trying to keep the conversation on a comprehensive view of what the oil and gas industry does, what we do, how we do it, why it's important to you. Keep it comprehensive. Don't get into specifics, because specifics, you can't see the forest for the trees. We want to stay focused on keeping a view of the forest, because if you understand the role of the forest, then you're able to identify the different trees in it later. But keep it on the generality of the importance of the industry and how important it is into each person's life that comes to our booth.
It's a little more difficult in the media because it becomes subjective. In the oil and gas industry, you're talking about science and you're trying to dumb it down. In the media, we could just turn and look at them and say, well, they're not all award winners, and move on.
Yeah.
That type
Yeah.
of thing. So let's talk about the university a little bit. I know you do some stuff with the University of Kansas, I believe Kansas State, and also some high schools, but it revolves around sports and some sponsorships and a number of things. So explain to the individuals and the people and some of the other oil and gas associations that what are you doing with the universities and the football and the classrooms and all that stuff?
Yeah, we do try and interact with all of our state schools that are here in the state. We've had programs in the past that everything from signage in their sports complexes to radio programming to halftime interviews. Right now, we got a really neat one going with Kansas State University with their football program called Touchdowns for Teachers. And Touchdowns for Teachers, we ran this at KU the past couple years, moved it over to K-State just to try and reach a little bit different audience this year. But the way it works is every time K-State scores a touchdown, $100 goes into a pot, and teachers in the state can sign up for free. They enter their name into the hat, and at the end of the season, we will draw one teacher out of that pot and give them $100 for every touchdown that was scored. Past few years, that has revolved around $5,000, a little less, a little more, with the schools that we worked with. And this is money that we give directly into the hands of a teacher. We don't give it to the school. We give it to the teacher so the teacher can utilize it in their classroom however they choose to utilize it. A couple years ago, we had an ag teacher out at Yates Center that won it, and he got over $5,000. I think it was $5,400 is what he got. And he was a shop teacher, and he always wanted to have as a shop project to build a hovercraft. And so they built a hovercraft on that $5,400. And so it's really a neat way for teachers to have a chance to do something in their classroom that they've always wanted to do, but the school has said no, the funding wasn't there, and this gives them an opportunity to really dream and bring something unique into the classroom. And it gives us a way to communicate with teachers the free programs that we have, because we go into classrooms all over the state and do Petro Pro programs. We do STEM works or STEM days with them. We do job and career fairs in the schools. All of that's free for the schools, and this gives us a way to connect with teachers to let them know about that program.
Did you have one for baseball too?
Yeah, we just concluded kind of a take off the touchdown for teachers. We did a home run for teachers. We have the National Baseball Congress, which is a 100-year-old baseball tournament for college students from all over the country. They come and they play on teams, and then they come to Kansas to compete in the NBC World Series. And we, at the NBC World Series, we sponsored home runs for teacher. Just gave the check away this past, let's see, that was Friday. No, yes, Friday. No, Thursday. Gave that check away this past Thursday to a teacher in Wichita, and gave away, I believe it was $4,400 to that teacher for that home runs for teacher gift for her to be able to use in her classroom as she sees fit. And so it's an ongoing program that we try and manipulate and move around, try and catch different audiences. We really like sports, because sports kind of overcomes the political divide, and we're able to talk more to a general audience in the public rather than a skewed audience that's skewed either right or left. It's more of, who are we as a nation? Go to just about any sports venue you want to go to, and you see a pretty good cross section of Americana.
Well, in sports also, and this is one of the things that people really fail to understand, is that sports is one of the few things that has a consistent large crowd base.
Yeah.
Consistent large crowd base. Occasionally you might have some concerts, but even your school concerts, I mean, you're lucky if you can get both parents to go today's day and age to this kid's school concert and the school plays and that sort of thing versus for some reason, whether it's the NFL or the local high school football game, you can still draw a crowd. And that is one of the things that I thought the oil and gas industry should have taken advantage of all the way through the 80s and 90s and today and everything along those lines is sponsoring college bowl games. Because when you go to a sporting event, whether you win or lose, generally you walk away having a positive experience because you're there with your friends and your community. And most people, at least outside of fanatics, are fans. Fanatics are a whole different ball game. Put them into their own category, okay? Because you're never going to please a fanatic. They actually get into fistfights, Warren. People will get into fistfights over people they've never met before. My favorite story is when Brett Favre got traded or went signed with the Minnesota Vikings, and two brothers who grew up on the border of Minnesota and in Wisconsin, they got into a fight to where the cops showed up. They got charged, whatever, public disturbance or whatever, because they fought over which Brett Favre was better, the Brett Favre Viking or the Brett Favre Packer. And I thought, Brett Favre doesn't care about either one of you two, and you just went to jail for him. My goodness, you are the fanatic of a lifetime, man, because that's where it comes from, fanatic. But anyway, yeah. This is why we get to existential energy at times on Labor Day. We can extend the conversation. The point is that it's so fun. You walk away with a positive experience. So I applaud what you're doing in terms of, making sure that everybody who goes to a Kansas State game, who they just beat the University of North Dakota barely over the weekend. What's going on, Kansas State? You lose to Iowa State and you barely get by a North Dakota school that's not the national champion, for crying out loud. That's a whole different ballgame. But what is your response? What is your advice? What is your feedback? And do you have any metrics to kind of track the investment that you've made for the industry into these large positive experiences?
Yeah, we do. We do a lot of surveys online before and after every campaign, and we go in and definitely the metrics are there that when we do stuff like this, it definitely helps our favorability in the regions or with the communities in which we are doing these efforts. Definitely helps our favorability. But I agree with you. I think that the oil and gas industry has missed tremendous opportunities by going in and sponsoring not just sports venues, but the arts, media, sponsoring movies and being a part of those things. For a long time in the oil and gas industry, we took the position that we don't have to do anything because you cannot survive without us. So we don't have to respond to anything you're saying. We don't have to advertise ourselves. You can't live without us, so accept it. And then you had the environmental movement that really began to gain traction at the grassroots level, grew up and became a political force that was moving in, really taking positions within the political positions within our government that really began to hurt us. And we realized way too late as an industry that we should have been talking to the public a long time ago to help them understand what it is we do, how important it is to their life. And because we didn't do that, we're now starting at -10 in many places where we start this conversation about the value of the oil and gas industry in people's lives. We're starting at a -10 and trying to crawl back to a 0 instead of starting at the ground floor at 0 and working on our positivity moving forward from the very beginning. And so I agree with you. I think the oil and gas industry historically has missed a huge opportunity by not more effectively communicating with the public the value, the importance, and how this industry is what has created the lifestyle that we get to enjoy today. And we missed that boat. All we can do now is jump in such a way that we help people gain that understanding before they make decisions that would greatly harm, like Germany did, and like many European nations did when they tried to just eliminate everything that had to do with fossil fuels, and then the entire world collapsed, and they were like, "Oh man, we didn't mean to do that," and it was too late. And they were behind the eight ball, and it's going to take them a long time to get out from behind the eight ball. We don't want that to happen here. We as an industry need to be effectively communicating the importance of our industry to the people in America so that they are able to choose their best energy future. Because that best energy future right now has to include oil and natural gas.
It's rather interesting. I got an email over the last week from somebody who's been a Crude Life supporter, or not supporter, I guess subscriber. They're more in the environmental movement, but they've always appreciated our approach to be more of a newsy based, unbiased, if you will. Obviously, we have a lean towards the oil and gas industry, but it's more of the innovation and community building and solution based. But we kind of try to stay away from politics and the name calling and a lot of that stuff, because it's just, in the world of media, Warren, you have to have vanilla before you can have Rocky Road. And if you do not have vanilla, then you're just an opinion-based point of view. That's it. And so we call that short-term gain equals long-term pain. That you got to really lay the foundation. And with the rise of podcasting, the foundation's been a lot different because so many people are just starting out as Rocky Road that there's not very many vanillas. One of the things that I found, this story is going to be longer, apparently. I apologize. But when I started the Crude Life, we actually started out to be investigative against oil and gas, because I didn't come from oil and gas. I came from farming. I came from the media. I was 7 hours away from the nearest oil and gas rig. And so when I went out to do my media company that was based on news, because back 15 years ago, news and information, you could monetize it. We were actually going to be against the oil and gas industry because that's the way I was programmed. You talked about the earthquakes, how all of a sudden out of nowhere, everybody's asking about earthquakes in Kansas in relation to the oil and gas industry. Oh, well, that seems to be the same time when media is talking about it, and they've never talked about it before. They've never talked about it again. Well, this is when they were kind of percolating we're getting ready for the Greta movement, if you will. It was probably shortly after Al Gore, about 10 years after Al Gore within that, now that I'm thinking about it, with the inconvenient truth, which people still cite as factual. I actually went out and embedded myself in the industry because I'm the journalist, because I'm trained. I have a respect for information. I was baptized a Catholic, so I was spoon-fed fear and guilt my whole life down on my knees. You know what I mean? As I prayed and that sort of thing. So I had respect for the truth and a few other things. And so I went out and I embedded myself in the industry. And Warren, it didn't even take me a day to realize the oil and gas industry was not the villain. Like, are you kidding me? The oil and gas industry solving so many problems. The Crude Life actually turned into a positive for the oil and gas industry. But we saw that we couldn't be political because for some reason the oil and gas industry was getting extremely political. I grew up when it wasn't. I grew up when the only thing that was political with the oil and gas industry was gas prices. That was it. Nobody ever talked about any issues. Then all of a sudden, after Al Gore and a few other things, you couldn't even say the word oil and gas without people all of a sudden getting their dukes up and ready to fight. So with the Crude Life, we decided to focus on the positive. We decided to focus on the community building and the innovation because, my goodness, there was more than enough stories to keep 10 people busy, let alone focus on what the political argument of the day was. And here's the thing, Warren, we were the only ones doing what we were doing because everybody else was focused on the political crap that nobody. And so that's one of the reasons why we obviously gravitated towards you and a few others, because every state seems to have people that are trying to connect with people that are outside of the industry. Because I agree with you and others when we say we're our biggest, and we, I mean oil and gas industry when I'm saying that, not necessarily the royal we. We're our biggest enemy. We are our biggest enemy. Agriculture, the same thing happened with agriculture. The same thing happened with media. And agriculture, it was the subsidies it was the short-term gain equals long-term pain. Let the government tell me what to plant and where to plant and how often to plant. In the media, we got our ego. We had a monopoly for 100 years in every town we were in. No, are you kidding me? Everybody comes to us for the information. What's Yahoo? What's Facebook? That's social media. What's that crap? I think that's the problem with the oil and gas industry. How do we get over ourselves is what I'm talking about, because it's tough when you've got either a tribal mentality or everybody relied on you for a long time, because there's a layer of disconnect that's really hard to connect with, Warren. I just probably said a lot of things that got myself in a lot of trouble, but I don't care, because I do think that the industry does need to learn how to connect within the industry more. I really do. So anybody outside the industry, sorry for the inside baseball talk real quick that we got into, but talk me down and then we'll go to the Eastern Kansas thing.
No, I have an advantage. I have an advantage that's similar to your advantage, and I'm not an oil and gas guy. My background is in leadership development. My background is in missions and working in 28 countries around the world. And what I saw is the number one thing that held people back from being who they were created to be, in my opinion, who they were created to be, was the fact that they didn't have access to affordable and reliable energy. I've worked in the Middle East, Pakistan, India, Afghanistan, the Kashmir, Egypt. I've worked in Latin America, Guatemala, Honduras, El Salvador, worked in a lot of those countries. And energy is the main thing that holds people back. That's the perspective that I came from. Energy, by definition, is the ability to do work. What is it that most people say when they look at people living in poverty? Well, they just need to work more. You can't work without energy. You have to have the energy. And so I came into the industry really with that perspective. If you would have asked me 15 years ago, would you be in the oil and gas industry? If you would have asked me 10 years ago, would you be in the oil and gas industry? I would have said absolutely not. I've never even thought about that. But as my life progressed and I got this opportunity and I've become what's considered an expert in our industry in some ways, it's because I look at it from that perspective of humanity. I look at it from the perspective of what is it that our industry actually adds to our lives? What is it that actually we benefit from this? Because you can't just you got to do a cost benefit analysis. You just can't do a cost analysis. You have to do a cost benefit analysis. And for example, that's part of that 1,200 miles that we drove this weekend. One of those stops along the way was to celebrate the 4th birthday of my granddaughter. My granddaughter, who had a heart transplant 4 years ago, and when she was born, and had part of her aortic system rebuilt, was in the hospital for an entire year. That process, you go into that hospital room and you see all of the machines that it took to keep her alive. Every single one of them is completely dependent upon petroleum in order to have that machine. That's part of the benefit that a lot of people don't even think about when they think about our industry. And that's the perspective that I come from and try and bring back into our industry, because our industry wants to get into charts. We want to get into production numbers. We want to get into technology. We want to get into number of barrels. And my pleasure is to be able to come into our industry here in Kansas and say, you're a part of a bigger picture. You're just a piece, the beginning piece of a much bigger picture. Let me help you understand what that picture looks like, because it's the picture that matters. If it wasn't for the picture, no one would care what you're doing out there in the field. But because you're a part of this bigger picture that betters humanity, people care. and you need to understand what part you play in that bettering of humanity.
Speaking of bigger pictures, speaking of bigger pictures, to be a little bit more phonetic and pronounceable here. From black gold to silver screen, Warren Martin and yours truly, myself, we're going to be up on stage at the Eastern Kansas Oil and Gas Association, their annual meeting, September 11th. Is it the 10th or the 12th?
It's the 11th.
The 2 days, September 10th and
10th and
11th?
11th, yeah.
September
10th
11th?
and 11th, yeah.
10th and 11th,
Yeah,
okay.
big day, the main conference day is
So we'll be on, yeah, that's right. The 10th is the golf and probably a mixer or something like that. Usually people get in around 5 or something along those lines. But anyway, so the conference, obviously we mentioned before, there's a lot of annual meetings happening and conferences to kind of review and get people ready for next year. We're going to be doing something a little bit different that I think is going to be fantastic. And of course it's my media world, and so I'm loving it. And Warren and myself, we're going to be talking about how the media has shaped our perception and perspective of the oil and gas industry for probably the last 50 years or so. And we're going to start with the movie Giant. And a lot of people do not remember that movie Giant, but it was a rags to riches James Dean story. And a lot of people will know who James Dean is. So James Dean, the most popular sex symbol of that day, was the person that brought oil and gas to the top. But we will discuss that in very short. Go ahead.
Yeah, but he was just the sexiest guy at that point in time because neither you or I had been born yet. Really, we weren't on the scene yet.
Well, that goes without saying. That goes without saying, without a doubt. Right. And so, right. When I got ushered in is when they started rejecting the oil and gas industry. Yes, I know where we're going with this one. And then, from James Dean was the young, good looking guy, rags to riches, to the podunk backwoods, I'm eating raccoon stew for dinner. All of a sudden we're in Beverly Hills because I went to shoot a shotgun and it comes bubbling out. I mean, you want to talk about short-term gain. There you go, man. That's the lottery ticket right there. And that's the thing that I want to talk about too a little bit when we're up on stage, that they really presented the instant dream. And honestly, I think that's one of the best ways to describe the oil and gas industry, because when you take a look at what you're talking about, Warren, saving lives, you're talking about a guy that spent 18 days without food and water. I had a bag hooked up to me with just some potassium in it, basically. I called it my horchata because it had that milky white thing. That's all I had. I mean, I had so many machines hooked up to me and buildings that needed so many machines and et cetera, that were powered by oil and natural gas that I have to look at it as it literally saved my life. And so I'd be dead without it. You do look at life totally different when you start looking at it in that perspective. So it'll be interesting, then we'll get into Dallas. I believe that was the arc, the curve, if you will. They started introducing Dallas as kind of the original Gordon Gekko, the original greed is good. And it turned into kind of the soft villain, which then turned into the ultimate oil and gas as the new cigarettes. And that's kind of where we're at today. But anyway, what's kind of your quick preview of that, Warren, if you were going to tell somebody what we're going to talk about?
Yeah, it's, mine actually, and you and I've talked about it before, but the movie I'm going to throw out there is a movie that is not about oil and gas at all. The movie I'm going to throw out there is The Lorax, and in that show, it's really built around the idea of trees and protecting trees. And one of my favorite scenes in that is when the guy that runs the entire city, he's gotten rid of all the trees. He controls the air that they all breathe. and they find a new tree, a new seed that's beginning to grow, and they're fighting over whether they should let it grow or let it die. And he starts singing, "Let it die, let it die, let it shrivel up and die." And he goes through it. But the whole thing is built around this idea of trees. And this was a recent movie that was published, and it really shows how Hollywood tries to shape culture in a very significant way. Because if you go talk to any kid in school, they will tell you how important trees are and that we shouldn't cut down any trees. What gets ignored is the fact that it is actually more environmentally, is better for the environment to use brand new paper than it is to use recycled paper. Recycled paper harms the environment far more than brand new paper does, because you've got the collection, the sorting, the reprocessing, and then the distribution and everything else. It adds a lot more greenhouse gases. In fact, it's not and the second part of that is most people think we're cutting down forests. We actually plant, on average, 1.7 million more trees every single year here in America than we harvest. So the trees are actually growing. In fact, it is actually proven that we now have more trees in America than we had in the 1700s because we've planted so many trees. However, the storyline continues that we need to recycle, we need to protect our trees, we need to make sure that they're not utilized, when all trees that are used for products like that are grown as a crop in America today on a 15-year rotation. And so we have, completely kept up a storyline that's completely false. And we've kept up that storyline that is false because if you question whether or not you should recycle paper, and you find out that it's actually more harmful to the environment to recycle paper than it is to use something new, then you begin to question everything else that you've been told about the environment, because that is the basic 101. And, I think that is a central part of what we're trying to do through these movies, and is talking about not just what is it that Hollywood is saying, but what is it Hollywood is saying compared to what was actually happening at that time and what was actually the case. And are there some places we do need to question what people say about our industry? And I think the obvious answer is yes. And the biggest part is they only talk about the cost of the industry. They don't talk about the benefit of the industry. And I really want to focus in on that benefit side.
It's interesting about the Native Americans, and they knew the land so well. And, you can either almost any culture, and there's a mind, body, spirit, a Father, Son, Holy Spirit, if you will. There's rules of three, and it's was it the Creator, Destroyer, and there's something in the middle. I forget the name in the middle in India. But when you take a look at the way that the earth works, it works in a lot of that ways. And so what the Native Americans found out is that if you leave the land alone, you get so much death and decay that begins stacking on top of each other. Eventually, God or the thunderbolt from high, or Odin or whoever, is going to strike with a lightning bolt down. And now you've got burning and a fire that is so hot, it actually sterilizes and destroys the earth. Whereas if you do a controlled burn, if you bring it in and control it, you get new growth and new rebirth, and it actually brings in the game, and it actually creates life. So if you can understand how to become the creator and the destroyer and all that different things, instead of just letting it go, you can actually become more productive out there. And that's how I look at a lot of these things, to where we're really trying to understand things that really is just recycled knowledge over and over again. And politics can really ruin a lot of things. We used to be able to sit down and have conversations at our kitchen table, and we can't anymore. Politics is now in our science, it's now in our schools, it's now in our churches, it's now in our math, it's now in our, there's not a place where politics isn't. It's in our energy. At some point, we got to just remove politics pretty soon here, Warren. I was thinking about that the other day. Is like, you can't even have a kitchen breakfast table conversation anymore with your family because so many people they want to out hype each other and out offend each other and out there's like competition over who can become more emotional over topics. And so not the place I wanted to end really here, Warren, but I did want to put out a little warning that maybe it's time that we take a look at all the places we do have politics, like science and like schools, and ask, is it really the best thing to bring politics in these places? Because when I grew up, we had the separation of the two. Go ahead, Warren.
Yeah, and going right along with the illustration that you just brought up, I mean, that's a classic example of how politics really becomes contradictory because you have many places here in the United States where uh, forests are absolutely protected by the governments that oversee them, say in California, some places back east. You can't touch the trees. You can't touch fallen trees. You don't clean up underneath the forest. And you're exactly right. It creates a fire hazard. And we've seen that in California and other places that has burned out of control. And then another side to that is the number one producer of methane in the world. The number one thing that produces more methane than anything else in the world is decaying trees. Decaying trees in the forest and in the rainforest and the jungles, bogs. Anytime you have a carbon-based creature that begins to decay, it releases methane. And when you leave those trees and those tree trunks and you let a forest or jungle go without any caretaking taking place, that's where the biggest contributor of methane is in the world. It comes from those trees. So, in many places here in the United States, you have the same political party that sees no problem in advocating for leaving the trees alone, let them lie in their natural state, which produces methane, but let's get methane completely out of our system by getting rid of oil and natural gas. And when you're actually enabling the biggest producer of methane and disabling the biggest thing that really allows you to live the lifestyle that you're able to live today in this world. And so I think that's a classic example of how when politics get into it instead of science, and the science of forestry management, the science of chemistry and physics, when you put politics into the science, you start getting very contradictory messages like that.
I think two of the songs or two of the stories that describe politics the best as I get older is There's a Hole in My Bucket, Dear Liza, because he talks about all the different ways to fix it. And then when you bring in let's see, to get the mouse, you bring in the cat, and then you bring in the dog to get the cat, and then you bring in the lion to get the dog. And that to me is politics, where you just keep bringing in a bigger problem to solve the little problem, and then you got to bring in a bigger problem to solve the little. It gets to be a little much. But well, Warren, all right, I appreciate the conversation today. We're going to talk. Oh, go ahead.
I got to answer that one because to me, politics is very simple. Politics is, I believe it was Delbert and Ebert and Delbert, one of those little cartoons that I saw back when I was a kid, and had the two guys that were sitting in the lounge chairs, TV in front of them, and the TV speaks off and says, "And now for your election results." And one of the guys just crosses his hand over his face and says, "I can't watch. I just know one of them's going to win." That's politics.
That is politics. And with that, folks, Kansas Strong. Warren Martin is his name. Check him out at the Kansas State Fair starting Friday. Is that right? This Friday?
Sure. Yes.
And then myself and Warren will be up on stage doing the co-keynote at the Eastern Kansas Oil and Gas Association with the debut of From Black Gold to Silver Screen, how the oil and gas industry has been shaped in the media. I'm sure the secondary line, the byline, will be shaped by that. We're going to have to start advertising it here this week as well to let people know, because I think this is going to be a very popular presentation, actually, that could go outside of the industry too, and people would really appreciate some of the insights. So, any final thoughts, Warren?
Now, just looking forward to seeing a lot of people over the next couple of weeks around the state of Kansas, and I look forward to seeing you down here in Kansas. It'll be the first time that we've actually met in person, and it'll be great to see you, Jason. And if you're at the state fair, if you're at KIOGA, we'll be at the Texas Tech K-State game doing a halftime interview. So, there's a lot of places you can find us around the state, and we'd love to talk with you. We'd love to hear what questions you might have about the oil and gas industry. So if you see Kansas Strong is there, stop on by and say hi.